What if the loneliest moment of your life, standing in a crowded wedding hall with no one by your side, turned out to be the exact second your heart started beating again? A single dad, still drowning in grief 4 years after losing the love of his life, walks into that wedding alone, and a woman he barely knows shouts across the entire room, "Look at me." If you think you've heard every second-chance love story, stay with me until the final sentence. Because this one isn't about fairy tale romance. It's about two broken people who learned that sometimes the loudest cry for help is whispered in the simplest words, and how that shout saved not just one heart, but an entire family. You're not going to want to pause this. Let's begin. Caleb Mercer had practiced saying no to every invitation for 4 straight years. Birthday parties, block cookouts, even his own sister's baby shower, he always found an excuse. "Noah has a cold, I have to work late, I'm just tired." The truth was simpler and far more painful. Every happy gathering felt like walking into a room where everyone else still believed in forever, while his forever had ended in a hospital bed with Emily's hand growing cold in his. But this time he couldn't say no. Mark, his best friend since high school, the guy who had sat with him through every chemo treatment and every nightmare, was getting married. And Mark had begged. "Just show up, man. Even for an hour. I need my brother there." So Caleb bought a new shirt, the first one without motor oil stains in years, kissed 5-year-old Noah goodnight at his aunt's house, and drove to the vineyard venue alone. The ceremony was beautiful in that cruel way beautiful things can be when you're grieving. Sunlight poured through the oak trees, the bride glowed, vows were spoken, and Caleb clapped with everyone else while his chest felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible fist. He kept seeing Emily in every smiling face, her laugh in the maid of honor's giggle, her gentle eyes in the way the groom looked at his new wife. By the time the reception started, Caleb was already planning his escape. He found a quiet corner near the dessert table, half hidden behind a tall floral arrangement, and stared into a glass of sparkling cider like it held answers. That was when he heard it. "Hey! Look at me." The voice cut straight through the music and laughter, loud, confident, and strangely familiar. Caleb lifted his head. Across the dance floor, waving both arms like she was directing airport traffic, stood Grace Holloway. His next-door neighbor. The woman whose husband had died in a highway accident 3 years ago. The woman who planted sunflowers every spring and always waved when she saw Caleb pulling into his driveway, even though they had never spoken more than 10 words to each other in all that time. Grace didn't wait for him to respond. She marched straight through the crowd in a flowing burgundy dress, her dark curls bouncing, eyes locked on him like he was the only person in the room. "You're not hiding back here all night, Caleb Mercer," she declared when she reached him, hands on her hips. "I've watched you mow your lawn like a robot for 4 years. Tonight you're going to talk to someone who actually understands what it feels like to come home to an empty house." Caleb blinked, stunned. No one had ever called him out so directly. Most people tiptoed around his grief like it was broken glass. But Grace wasn't tiptoeing. She was standing right in it with him. I don't really dance," he mumbled. "Good," she said, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. "Because I don't either. I just wanted to make sure you didn't spend the whole night pretending you're invisible." They ended up at a small table near the edge of the patio, away from the loudspeakers. At first the conversation was awkward, whether, how the bride looked, how expensive weddings had become. Then Grace asked the question no one else ever dared. How old was Noah when Emily passed? Caleb's throat tightened. He had just turned 1. He doesn't even remember her voice. Grace nodded slowly, her own eyes glistening. Lily was 2 when David died. She still asks me if heaven has Wi-Fi so she can send him drawings. And just like that, the dam broke. For the next 2 hours they talked like people who had been starving for someone who spoke their language. Caleb told her about the nights he sat on the bathroom floor so Noah wouldn't hear him crying. Grace confessed she still set 2 plates on the table out of habit some evenings. They laughed, actually laughed, about the ridiculous things grief made them do, Caleb once bought Emily's favorite perfume and sprayed it on her pillow for months. Grace kept David's voicemail saved and played it every Christmas morning. When the DJ announced the last slow song, Grace stood and held out her hand. "One dance," she said softly. "Not because we have to. Because we're both still here." Caleb took her hand. As they moved awkwardly under the string lights, something inside his chest shifted. It wasn't fireworks or movie magic. It was quieter. Like the first crack in winter ice when spring decides it's finally time to arrive. When the song ended, Grace didn't let go right away. "I live 30 feet from you, Caleb," she whispered. "And tonight is the first time I've felt less alone in 3 years. Don't disappear on me when we get home, okay?" He nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. That night, driving home alone, Caleb did something he hadn't done in 4 years. He smiled. A real one. The next morning Grace was in her front yard pulling weeds when Caleb pulled into his driveway with Noah. Before he could overthink it, he walked over with his son's hand in his. "Lily." Grace called, and her 7-year-old daughter came running, pigtails flying. Within minutes the two kids were chasing each other around the sunflower patch like they'd known each other their whole lives. Caleb and Grace stood on the sidewalk watching them, the morning sun warm on their faces. "I meant what I said last night," Grace said quietly. "I don't want to be strangers anymore." From that day forward, their lives quietly wove together. Monday evenings became shared dinners, nothing fancy, just spaghetti or grilled cheese, where the 4 of them sat around one table and the house felt full again. Noah started calling Grace, Miss Grace, and then, after a few weeks, just Grace in the softest voice. Lily taught Noah how to ride a bike without training wheels while Grace and Caleb sat on the porch steps drinking iced tea. But healing is never a straight line. 3 months in, Caleb panicked. He and Grace had gone on their first official date, dinner and a movie, and when he walked her to her door, she kissed his cheek. It was innocent, gentle, perfect. That night he lay awake staring at the ceiling, guilt crashing over him like a wave. How could he feel this happy? How could he let another woman's lips touch his skin when Emily's grave was only 10 miles away? The next 2 weeks he pulled back. Shorter conversations over the fence. Made up excuses why the kids couldn't play. Grace noticed immediately, but she didn't push. She simply left a small pot of sunflowers on his doorstep with a note that read, "Whenever you're ready to look at me again, I'll still be here." The real turning point came on a rainy Thursday evening. Noah had a nightmare about Mommy in the hospital and woke up screaming. Caleb held his sobbing son, feeling completely helpless, when there was a soft knock at the front door. It was Grace in pajamas and a raincoat, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "I heard him through the wall," she said simply. "Can I come in?" She didn't try to fix anything. She just sat on the edge of Noah's bed and told him the story of how her own dad used to chase away monsters with silly dances. Then she did the dance. Noah laughed through his tears. And when the little boy finally fell asleep, Grace turned to Caleb in the hallway and said the words that broke him open completely. "You're allowed to be happy again, Caleb. Emily would want that. She loved you too much to want you to live like this forever." He cried then, ugly, shaking sobs he had never let anyone see. Grace held him right there in the hallway while rain tapped against the windows, and for the first time he didn't feel ashamed of his tears. After that night, everything changed. They took the kids to the pumpkin patch together. They decorated Christmas cookies as a family of 4. They planted a small rose bush in Caleb's backyard, Emily's favorite flower, right beside Grace's sunflowers. And slowly, carefully, they let themselves fall in love. There were still hard days. Anniversaries that hurt. Nights when one of them would wake up reaching for a ghost. But they faced them together. They talked about their late spouses openly, kept their pictures on the walls, and taught the children that loving someone new didn't mean forgetting the ones who came first. One warm spring evening, almost exactly 1 year after the wedding, Caleb took Grace back to that same vineyard. This time the kids were with them, running ahead through the grass. Under the same string lights where they had danced for the first time, Caleb dropped to one knee. "I spent 4 years thinking my story was over," he said, voice thick. "Then you shouted across a crowded room and reminded me it was only beginning. Grace Holloway, will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life looking at you?" Grace laughed through happy tears. "I've been waiting for you to ask since the moment I yelled, 'Look at me.' Yes. 1,000 times yes." The kids cheered and tackled them both in a group hug. Today, if you drive past the little yellow house on Maplewood Lane, you'll see 2 adults and 2 children laughing in the front yard. You'll see sunflowers and roses growing side by side. You'll see a single dad who once thought joy had left him forever now carrying his new wife on his back while their kids chase bubbles across the lawn. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of that one brave shout that started it all. "Look at me." Because sometimes the loudest way to say, "I'm still here, and so are you," is the simplest. The message that stays with you long after the story ends. No matter how deep the grief, how long the loneliness, or how convinced you are that your best days are behind you, never stop believing that love can find you again. Sometimes it arrives quietly in a neighbor's wave. Sometimes it arrives shouting across a crowded room. But it always arrives the moment you're finally brave enough to look up and say, "I'm ready to be seen." So if you're watching this and your heart feels heavy tonight, look up. Someone out there is waiting to shout your name. You are not alone. And your story? It's nowhere near over.